lot of good information on there. So with that, I'll introduce Tommy Lively with Cobb-Vantress. He been with Cobb about 12 years, I believe, as a hatchery specialist, travels all over the world, North America, South America, many other parts of the world, working with their many customers. So we've seen a lot of things. Total of 27 years in the poultry industry, is that correct? Done
That's
things with
correct,
hatcheries,
yep.
breeders, all over. So a lot of good information that and experience that he has. So with that, we'll let Tommy go ahead and load up his presentation here. I will step out. You will see Tommy, and I will come back at the end, and we'll see y'all then. So Tommy, make sure you get all loaded up here, and I'll step away.
Are we good?
Looks good. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, sir. Dr. Brownwell, it's a pleasure to be joining the webcast this morning. Thank you for inviting me. Hope I can supply some good information to everyone. Hope everyone is staying safe out there and working through the trying times that we're in. I know the last few months is just personally, I've been really proud of our industry and everyone in it, how we've, kind of overcome the challenges and continue to work. And no one more than the people in the hatchery. The hatchery group is always, they don't get the recognition sometimes, but all you hatchery managers out there do a great job, and you're very much appreciated. So Dr. Brownwell and I had talked about this presentation, and we decided I would present on hatchery sanitation. It's not always the most exciting presentation in the world, but it is super important, and we in the hatchery group all know how important it is. So, guys, I'm having a little technical difficulty getting my presentation to move forward. Let me try loading it again.
So sometimes as well with load, and when I've done, I have to use the arrow key rather than the.
Yeah, I just tried that.
It didn't
Let me
work.
see. Let me try sharing again. It worked. Ah, there it goes.
We're seeing your whole arrow. You good?
Oh, so I think we're good now.
All right.
All right, very good. So hatchery sanitation, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about the ingredients that put in our hatchery first. We're going to talk about the daily cleaning, the incubators and the hatchers, applying sanitizers, cleaning the tray and box washes, chillers, hatchery fumigation, which is always a big subject in hatcheries, and monitoring, what we're doing to monitor to make sure we're getting the level of sanitation that we're looking for. So the first thing we need to talk about are the eggs coming into the hatchery. We're never going to get those super good hatchery monitoring results if our contamination levels are really high. We have to make sure we're communicating with the breeder managers, with the growers, making sure they understand if we're having high levels of contamination. And this is not a egg management presentation, but we need to make sure that we're monitoring those eggs coming in, that we're getting good quality eggs into the hatchery. The other thing that I have run across several times are hatcheries that are really struggling with aspergillus, and when they begin swabbing those eggs coming in, they're actually having aspergillus come in from the farm. So you need to make sure that you are you're plating those eggs coming in, and that if you have farms with aspergillus problems that are bringing it to you. If you're bringing asper into the hatchery from the outside on the eggs, you're never going to get that hatchery clean until you get those egg rooms clean on the farm, or those egg belts, or whatever is causing that problem. So first things first, make sure we have a good egg pack and we have good clean eggs coming in that are free of aspergillus. The next ingredient in the hatchery that often gets overlooked is the tap water. This is a pretty rough picture here, but you know, our water coming into the hatchery is of varying qualities. And the last hatchery I managed, it was a Jamesway hatchery, and we had really good tap water. We didn't have buildup in our lines like this at all. But we had another hatchery within Cobb. The water is a municipal water system, but that water was just terrible. And we would get the kind of buildup you see here in this picture in just 4 or 5 years. And so we had to make sure that we were really filtering, really treating that water, and making sure we had everything in those lines as clean as possible. If you want to have Pseudomonas in your chicks, have Pseudomonas in your water coming in. It can be a big problem. And Pseudomonas is a lot bigger problem today without antibiotics at de novo. You know, when you're shooting antibiotics at de novo, you cover up a lot of things. But when you don't have those antibiotics, you really need to make sure that water coming in is perfect. I recommend chlorine dioxide products, reverse osmosis systems. They both work well, but we need to make sure we're sanitizing that water coming into the hatchery. And also make sure you're swabbing your water hoses that you wash everything down with to make sure you're not growing Pseudomonas in those water hoses hanging on the wall. So make sure you're testing the water weekly. And if you need a chlorine dioxide or a reverse osmosis system, that's some of the best money you'll ever spend as far as your sanitation program goes. And then really the third ingredient that we have in the hatchery is the air that we bring in. You know, our ventilation systems, they have to be clean, they have to be sanitized. We need to make sure we're not growing anything in those ventilation systems that we're going to send straight into the machines. So that's a super important part of it as well. You know, the filters on our air handling units should be changed on a regular basis. And it's really good to make sure you're dating those filters. So anytime you go up, and as a hatchery manager, you can go up and look at those filters and see when they've been changed. Make sure you have a good program and that that's being done completely. I very often go into hatcheries and see negative pressures in incubator halls or hatcher halls. And the first thing I do when I see this is to go up on the roof, and very often I will find a filter like this that has not been changed. If you're not getting the airflow through those filters, through those air handler units, you're going to end up with negative pressure. This isn't a ventilation presentation either, but the sanitation program plays a big part in how your ventilation works. I really like the internal frame filters. They do a very good job. They're a little more expensive, but they, in my opinion, allow your ventilation equipment to last longer, to perform better, and to do a better job of filtering out particles coming in. With the old style filters, you'll often get a gap like this between the filters, which will allow chick down to just seal up those coils. So it's important if you have these types to make sure they're sealed well. But the frame filters do a good job of preventing that. There's no gaps in there at all. So I really do recommend those. When those coils are dirty, when we allow that chick down or dust to get in those coils, they're not going to be efficient. They're not going to supply the air they need, and they're going to have to run a lot longer to do the same job. I see this all the time in hatcheries. As Dr. Bramwell said, I visit hatcheries around the world, and this is not just a U.S. problem. This is something I see around the world where coils are getting filled, and it eats the coils up too, and really decreases the life of those air handling units and those air conditioners. Make sure when you are cleaning these coils that you're using low pressure. If you take a high pressure hose and try to clean these coils, we all know what's going to happen there. We're going to bend those little fins over and completely seal them, and we're not going to have a functioning unit very long if we do that. Make sure you're removing the dust and the debris, but that you're using low pressure water to do it. Low pressure water, a good coil cleaner that you rinse out so it can't cause damage, will go a long way. When we get into the hatcheries in a moment, I'll talk about that, but Also remember your hatcher room is not clean until the air handler unit is clean. Until you've got that air handler unit supplying that room clean, that hatcher room is not clean. So this is what we're looking for. We're looking for a unit that's completely clean and ready to go. The final thing I'll mention on the ventilation is the condenser coils for your units. You have to clean those as well. I see many people that put a screen on these to make the job a little easier so they can just take it off and wash it. But you know, this is something we have to focus on as well. We're producing a lot of chick down, a lot of dust around hatcheries, and these will get clogged pretty quickly if we're not doing a good job of cleaning them on a regular basis. Make sure you have a schedule and that you're cleaning all of your units on a regular basis. So moving into the machines themselves, in any type of machine, whether it be a Jamesway or whatever brand of incubation equipment you're using, you need to have a daily schedule for cleaning your incubators. As we go through that set and transfer process, you know, we know when we can get in the machine and we can do cleaning. The fan boards, the fans themselves, make sure you have a good rotational program and a good program where you're doing daily cleaning on your incubators. The second thing on incubators is you also need to shut them down occasionally and do a deep cleaning and maintenance. You need to completely shut the machines down. In Jamesway hatcheries, after you transfer those eggs out of the 6th position, I don't know if Jamesway recommends this or not, but we would take the eggs out of another machine, completely strip it down and move those eggs into the 6th position of other machines so we could clean that machine top to bottom. I would recommend doing this at least twice a year so that you take that machine completely down. You can check gaskets much better, replace any gaskets that need to be replaced, and just do a really thorough cleaning in those machines at least twice a year. Moving on to hatchers. The goal in the hatchers is to not allow this to happen. We need to make sure we keep those hatchers clean and that we don't get buildup on them. This is obviously a very, very old hatcher, but it's got a lot of buildup on it and hasn't been cleaned and maintained as it should over the years. So hatchers, we all know how to clean hatchers, but I'll run through it really quickly. The first step is to sweep and get out any loose eggshells and fluff. Make sure you get it cleaned down and any loose debris out of it. And then rinse it out. Once you have the shells and chick down out, then rinse that machine out, get as much debris out as you can, and then foam it. Foam it with a good quality cleaner and step back and wait for a good 15 or 20 minutes. So once you get that first machine swept down, rinsed out, then you can foam it, and then you can move on down the line cleaning hatchers and come back to this machine in 15 or 20 minutes after that foam has had time to work. There's some really good products out there today to clean hatchers with, and if you give them time to work, they'll make your job a whole lot easier. And then we need to scrub the machine. We foam it, we have good products, but we also have to scrub it. Elbow grease goes a long way. You cannot just foam the machine and walk away. You have to do some scrubbing. You have to scrub fan blades, doors. You know, there's no replacement for that. You have to do the scrubbing and the manual part of it too. So don't think you can just foam it and walk away. You also have to put the elbow grease into cleaning these hatchers on a daily basis, really. And don't forget the plenum. The plenum, we know we're exhausting air into the plenum. Theoretically, it wouldn't come back into the hatchery, but it does. It's never sealed perfectly. There's never a time when you don't have a little backflow. And we need to make sure we're cleaning those plenums after every hatch, and that we're cleaning, you know, we're cleaning them top to bottom, and we're not getting areas where we can grow asper in those plenums. We need to make sure we're doing a good job of cleaning them. And once again, I'm going to say this for the second time, make sure that you're cleaning those air handler units for the hatch rooms every hatch. If the hatch room is not clean until that air handler unit for that room has been cleaned and the filter is replaced, then your hatch room is clean. Using sanitizers, I always recommend when you're using sanitizers, and you should always use sanitizers, that you're foaming it. Foaming the sanitizer makes it much more effective. It's going to hold on those surfaces longer, and it's going to do a better job of killing any bacteria growth. So make sure you're foaming your sanitizers, and remember that the room or the hatcher or whatever you're cleaning is not truly clean until it's been sanitized. So make sure you're foaming the sanitizer and that you're sanitizing everything. Make sure when you're mixing your sanitizers that you're following the manufacturer's recommendations. These sanitizers are pretty strong chemicals, and we need to make sure that we're following the recommendation for whatever chemical we're using. There's a lot of good ones out there, and we need to make sure that we're following the recommendations and that we're mixing them appropriately. Use a good sanitizer that's labeled for Asper, that's labeled for the Pseudomonas, for the things that we're trying to kill in a hatchery, and make sure you're mixing it per the recommendations of the manufacturer. So one of the biggest problems I see as I travel around the world are dirty hatcher baskets. It's a very common problem. It's not just something that's I see here in the US, I see it around the world in hatcheries. And it's one of the things, you know, that chick, when it hatches, that open raw navel is going to be right on this hatcher basket. And we need to make sure it's as clean as possible and that we don't have debris on it when we transfer the eggs into the machine. You know, this is a typical tray wash here in the US. We'd see these a lot. And the maintenance of this machine is super important if we're going to have good, clean machines, or good, clean trays, rather. I would say fully 20% of the hatcheries that I go in, and this is around the world, will be looking at hatcher baskets, hatcher trays, and, you know, they're not as clean as they should be. And the manager will go, well, it normally does better than this, but we've got a motor down or a pump down right now. That is something I hear, whether I'm in Brazil or Thailand or here in the US. It's something that happens a lot. And I would just encourage everyone out there to make sure that you have extra pumps, extra motors, everything on hand to try to keep this machine going, because it's going to make a big difference in your tray cleanliness and eventually in your 7-day mortality. So that is something that I really encourage everyone to do. But other than maintenance on the tray wash machine, we need to make sure that we've got the machine up to temperature. If you're not up to 140 degrees, you're not killing Pseudomonas that you want to kill, or 60 to 66 in Celsius. Make sure that your soap is at the right level, that you're getting the level of soap in the machine to do the job. And make sure that your disinfect application, whether it be a spray bar or a dip tank at the back of the machine, is functioning properly and it's got the appropriate level of sanitizer in it. Dip tanks like this do a really good job, and I see a lot of these around the world, especially here in the US. They're very common, but you just need to make sure that you're measuring those sanitizer levels in it and that you're getting the amount of sanitizer on those trays that you think you are. This is a smaller tray wash machine from South America. We see a lot of these outside the US. If you're going to use a machine that's smaller like this, you need to make sure you're pre-soaking the trays and the baskets so that you can get a good clean. Soaking them really makes a difference in how clean you can get them. And I do recommend that if you have a smaller tray wash machine. Chick box cleanliness is really the same thing. You need to make sure that your machine's up to temperature, that you're using plenty of sanitizer on these boxes, and that, you know, it's everything is operating as it should. Again, temperature is super important. If you're running your tray wash 100 to 120 Fahrenheit or 37 to 48 Celsius, you're really growing Pseudomonas at those temperatures. You have to get up above 140, that 140 to 150 range to kill Pseudomonas. 60 to 66 in Celsius. That's where we want to be if we're going to kill Pseudomonas and get clean trays that we must have, really. Obviously, this is our goal, to get a clean hatcher basket. And when I say clean hatchery basket, it should be perfect. There shouldn't be anything on this thing at all. And it should be perfect and ready for that egg to be placed in it. I also see a lot of people, and we actually did this at Cobb a good bit, use their tray wash machines to wash egg flats. If the machine is designed and you can use it for this purpose, it does a really good job. We want to make sure we're not sending dirty egg flats back out there to the farm. We really push the farmers and the producers out there to supply us with clean eggs, and we need to make sure we're supplying them with clean egg flats as well when we send them back to the farm. So that's really important. And if you can run them through your tray wash, that does a good job. Many people have a buggy wash they use. Whatever you're using, as long as you're getting those flats clean and sanitized before they go back to the farm. Checking sanitizer levels throughout the process is super easy. You can get little strips like this to check with. Check those levels and make sure you're doing that and that you're recording it daily. So every few hours while you're processing, you need to be checking those levels and recording those levels to ensure that you're getting the kill that you think you are. One kind of side note here, when we talk about the clean room where that tray wash is and where we store our trays, ventilation in that room is super important. I know this is not a ventilation presentation either, but you need to have good exhaust on your tray wash and on this room so that you don't have steam and heat just pouring back into your separator room, overheating chicks. That's a common occurrence that I see. And we don't need to allow chick down either to fill your clean room and cover those freshly cleaned trays with chick down from the separator. So ventilation here is really important. The room needs to be positive while still pulling the steam out. So it's just something everyone needs to focus on. It's the ventilation in that clean room where that tray wash is at, where those clean trays are at. We need to make sure we're monitoring that and keeping a good handle on it. So fogging systems. I'm a big believer in fogging. I know that can be kind of controversial here in the US at times, but I'm a big believer in fogging with a good sanitizing product. It's just kind of the final step once you've cleaned that room, once you've sanitized everything with a foam, to go back then and fog that room and just cover as many surfaces as possible. It's really important. And so for incubator hall, once I set those eggs and moved them into the machine, I would go back and fog that incubator hall. A hatch room, once it's done cleaning and up to temperature, I would fog that hatch room. So once you get the rooms dry, cleaned and dry, go back and fog them is always a good thing. And I'm a big proponent of having a fogging schedule and following it. This is a typical fogging schedule. Room is laid out, and then which days and times it will be fogged. And so we would just have people initial off when that room had been fogged. So we knew it had been taken care of, and the schedule was being followed. Moving on to the hatcher fumigation. We know the kind of bacteria that's produced in the hatcher when those chicks begin piffing. We know those levels go through the roof very quickly, and they can really affect your 7-day mortality and your broiler performance in general if you allow the bacteria to go too high. There are basically 3 products that are used in the industry right now, the most common of which, of course, is formaldehyde. I would say 75% of the hatcheries in the world are using formaldehyde in the hatchers. Second most common would probably be hydrogen peroxide. And then third would be a glucot sanitizer disinfectant in the machine. So I would recommend doing something. If you're going to use formaldehyde, we recommend 0.075 milliliters per chick hatched. But if you don't do anything, I threw this slide in here. This is bacteria levels checked every couple of hours from transfer until pull. And you can see beginning at about 24 hours before pull how those bacteria levels, when we do nothing, which is the dark blue bar, we don't use anything, how those bacteria levels go too numerous to count pretty quickly. You know, when those chicks start piffing, the bacteria counts start climbing, and they reach too numerous to count if you're not doing anything. We within Cobb have used at least 3 or 4 different formaldehyde systems in the last 10 years. I'm a firm believer in automating the system if possible. It keeps you from handling the formaldehyde as much, the employees in the hatchery, and it gives you more consistent doses of formaldehyde into the machine. You know, safety is a big issue with formaldehyde. You have to make sure you're following all of the PPE requirements and everything that your company has set up. But if you can use formaldehyde, it is the most effective, and it will do a very good job. I just recommend automating that system and giving regular doses of formaldehyde at specific intervals. No more than 2 hours between doses is recommended. Hydrogen peroxide is the second most common sanitizer for hatchers. The big downside to hydrogen peroxide is it can be very corrosive. I was at a hatchery a few years ago, and the hatchery manager said, "Hey, we're getting great results with our hydrogen peroxide system." But he was running a very, very high level of hydrogen peroxide, probably twice what we would recommend. So he was getting a very good kill of bacteria, but he was also eating up all of the metal in that hatchery, in that hatcher. It can be very corrosive. The micron size is very important. The pressure and the spray tip to use is very important, and try to get that 14 to 16 micron size. And we would recommend not going more than 3% solution of the hydrogen peroxide because of how corrosive it can be. There has been good results. You see in this little bar graph that you know, you can reduce mortality using a glue clot product. There's several good ones out there, and they will make a difference, but they have not been shown to be as effective in reducing mortality and bacteria counts as formaldehyde and hydrogen peroxide. Moving on to the chiller. Chiller, if you have one in your hatchery, is a big item to make sure you're managing it. It can affect your sanitation within your hatchery. Make sure you're running the recommended chiller temperature. If you're allowing the chiller to run too cool, below that 59 to 64 degree recommended range, you're going to have a lot more buildup on your coils, and it's going to affect the performance of the coils as far as being able to control the temperature in the machine. But it's also going to make the cleanup and the sanitation of that machine much tougher. You should measure the temperature of the water going into the machine. That's where you should measure it, make sure it's the correct temperature. But if you get it too cold, if you're trying to run your chiller too low of temperature, you'll get a lot more buildup like this on your coils. And this will reduce their effectiveness, and it makes it much tougher to clean. And also, all that extra water from condensation in your machine is the perfect area for growing bacteria in your single stage machine or in your hatcher if you have your coils there. Sanitizing and processing equipment. Processing equipment, it's all of the chicks go across it. It's super important to make sure you get it clean. The counters, the sexing tables, if you have sexing tables, all the belts and carousels, all of this should be cleaned thoroughly at the end of every hatch. You should go back and sanitize all the equipment, and then you should fog the room once it's dry and up to temperature to make sure you're getting a good kill on all this automation that we all have in our hatcheries. Everyone in the industry has automation in their hatcheries, and keeping this equipment clean is super important. Just to touch base on vaccine mixing a little bit, we all know how important that can be. we have all heard horror stories of high mortalities and high 7-day mortalities from not following the proper procedures when mixing, from not checking the diluent to not cleaning the porch, doing all those, following all those protocols. It is super important, and it's something that can be overlooked, but it's something you really have to focus on a daily basis, both at the novo and at day one. As far as monitoring goes, you know, air plates and contact plates in your egg room, in your setters, your set room itself, hatchers and hatch rooms, all of these areas, hatcher baskets should all be plated on a weekly basis with air plates and contact plates. So we know what we are growing, we know what we have in the hatchery, and we know where to focus our efforts on cleaning. If we need to change our programs or our sanitizers, our cleaners, whatever we need to do, we're not going to know that if we're not monitoring and plating like we should. There are also some new products out there to allow for immediate testing, so you can swap something and get an immediate result on whether or not you have a bacterial load on that surface. These are pretty expensive little toys, but they can really help you focus on certain areas if you're having problems. And finally, the thing we all have to do as hatchery managers is go back and do a visual inspection. You know, we train our people, we give them the equipment they need, but we have to go back there and we have to make sure that the hatchery is as clean as we think it should be. When you walk through a hatchery, you can smell very often if there are cleaning issues. So we need to make sure we're in those rooms, we're in those machines, that we're looking for all those trouble spots where we know there may be problems, that we're putting our hands on the machines and we're actually breathing the air and knowing what's going on in our hatchery. There's no substitute for really a white glove inspection and making sure everything is cleaned properly. So this is the goal, right? This is a 7-day mortality by flock age. This is a pretty old slide, as many of you can guess, back in the days when we used plenty of antibiotics, and these were the levels we were able to achieve. And this will be tough to do right now with our current usage of antibiotics in the industry, but this is our goal. This is where we want to get back to. We want to make sure that we're cleaning and sanitizing and doing the things that we need to do to get these mortality levels back to where they were 10 or 15 years ago, really, in the industry. With more and more of the industry around the world moving away from antibiotics, both at the novo and at day one, it is a much bigger challenge to get the 7-day mortality, and focusing on sanitation and cleaning in the hatchery is a big part of that. So just kind of in conclusion, make sure you're focusing on doing that daily cleaning in the hatcher and the incubators. Make sure your water temperature in your machines, your trailer wash and your box wash machines are up to that 140 to 150 range, or 60 to 66 in Celsius. Make sure you've got a good hatcher fumigation program. Hatcher fumigation is super important, and make sure you have a good program there and you're following those protocols. Chiller temperature, make sure you're in the right range, and make sure your ventilation and your filter cleanliness is where it should be. So I ran through that pretty quickly. Hopefully you guys learned something though, and we'll get Dr. Bramwell back on here.
There we go.
There you go.
All right. Yeah, if you'd unshare your screen and we'll get to some questions. There we go.
There we go.
All right, that'll work. Very good presentation. A lot of good information there. Certainly is kind of what we expected from you. Some different types of questions here. I know, so I'll just say several people have asked in here specific recommendations for a brand, and I'm not really going to ask Tommy to do that, to pick a brand. So if you ask that, we may get back with you by email, but we're really not going to respond with a specific brand other than, you know, a type of cleaner maybe.
Yeah, there are several good brands out there. I mean, there are a lot of good sanitizers and cleaners out there, regardless of which area they were focusing on, but there are several good ones out there.
Yeah, and so, you know, I mean, we're going to kind of avoid that a little bit, but you know, there are rules of thumb to stick to as far as what types of cleaners to use at different places, and we may get to that. But for those that ask that, we're not going to entertain that live here. What about the air duct lines of the hatchery? How would you go about disinfecting those? And this was a question that was asked here, but I've also seen that with people that have an older hatchery. They know they've got stuff in the air ducts. I mean, what recommendations can you give for that?
So there are a couple of products out there where you actually mix two products together and produce a chlorine dioxide gas that seems to do a pretty good job. You can just use those in your ductwork, you know, probably monthly to try to keep any asper killed down. We don't have access, or most of the industry doesn't have access to the smoke bombs that we used to use. Those are kind of not been available for the last few years. But as much washing as you can do, you can have duct work that you can wash down is great. But using those chlorine dioxide products in there as well does work off. You mix the two products together and they gas off, and they do a pretty good job of killing bacteria in those duct works.
Kind of a follow-up question to that, and it was asked here, and I've been asked as well. So do you think it's possible if a hatchery has got some traces of aspirin, it's a very old hatchery, do you think that can be completely eliminated in the hatchery, or on these older hatcheries, are we just kind of trying to suppress it the best we can?
Hey, I'm a believer that it can be eliminated, but it takes a lot of work and a lot of cleaning, and you know, eliminating any wooden source in there at all. And maybe that's a naive answer. There may be some hatcheries out there that are, you know, so old and to the point that it can't be done, but I will certainly work at it and strive for it. That will be the goal.
The goal is to get there, and it's possible. Hard work, that elbow grease, right?
Right, absolutely.
Elbow grease and work. Okay, what would you recommend for testing, like your water, testing the water plates, ATP test? What kind of recommendations would you have for testing?
That's a very good question for our lab folks, but you know, making sure that you're getting bacteria counts tested on the water. You know, the RO systems can help with heavy metals in there and all as well, but really to get those bacteria counts is the biggest thing I would be looking for, to make sure we're not, you know, bringing bacteria into the hatchery, Pseudomonas into the hatchery with our fresh washed down water.
Mm-hmm. So would you recommend any type of water acidifier in the hatchery? I mean, in treating just your general water?
I recommend chlorine dioxide. Honestly, chlorine dioxide products to treat all of the water coming into the hatchery. It is much more of a problem now that we are not using antibiotics in the novo, and treating that water goes a long way.
Okay. Okay, a question about have old flocks with a lot of exploder eggs. What is there a disinfectant we can use to minimize that? And I mean, I know the best answer is get out the farm and see what's going on there, but these are coming into the hatchery now. So what is your recommendation as far as how to deal with that?
You know, a lot of people will actually, I have seen this outside of the U.S. where people will take those older flocks and they put them in specific machines. The problem with that I have seen is that that almost creates a cascading effect, and so you have so much contamination in those individual machines that even the good eggs you put in there end up becoming contaminated, and they're almost not worth setting. I would say the best thing I have seen is, even in multi-stage machines, is using a sanitizer in the incubator. Spray a sanitizer in there to try to kill bacteria when you have those eggs exploding in your incubator. To do that periodically seems to work best on where you have those older flocks. In general, it shouldn't be necessary. You shouldn't have to do that. But if you have a lot of contamination, if you have a lot of older flocks, you may want to look at using a glue clot product in the incubator to try to reduce those bacterial levels.
But long term, we need to get back out and figure out why they're coming in that way.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And hey, you know, a lot of things go into that. Egg handling, shell quality plays a big role in that. You know, all those things must come together to get us a good quality egg in there.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so you talked about your cleaning and sanitation of the hatchers and stuff. What not only just how to, but how frequently should you measure the effectiveness and quality of your cleaning process? You know, after it's cleaned, do you go back in periodically and test to see how well it's done, or?
Yeah, I would recommend contact plates at least once a week on the surfaces, so everything's clean, everything's dry. And you can go in there and use contact plates on the hatcher walls, on the hatcher baskets, the trays. Yeah, using those contact plates, and then, you know, plating those rooms and checking for airborne bacteria as well once the machine is clean and dry.
Okay.
At least once a week. If I didn't answer that, but at least weekly.
Yeah, because I know, you know, a lot of people will test their hatchery to see what's there, but it's important to test right after we clean to see if what we did was doing what we.
Yeah. You can't test anything when there's chick down present. If you have chick down present, you're going to be too numerous to count. You have to make sure everything's clean, everything's dry before you check.
Okay, you talked about spraying or fogging in the hatchers and hatch room. What about in the egg storage room? Is that something that you see and recommend? And
absolutely, yep. I didn't really touch on that, but absolutely, I would definitely recommend fogging the egg room. Our protocol was after every delivery of eggs to the hatchery, we had to fog the egg room. And when I was with Cobb as a primary breeder hatchery, we did a lot of egg room fogging. The only thing I was ever concerned about with that was actually putting so much quat in the room that we were sealing the pores on the eggs. I kind of worried about that for a little while, but I found that wasn't true. You're never going to put that much quat in there that you're sealing those eggs unless you're fogging them for 2 hours a day or something, you know, something crazy.
Okay. Along those same lines, if people are wanting to disinfect their eggs, and I know there are some equipment that we can do that, wetting the eggs and cleaning machines. When would be the best time to do that if somebody was wanting to try and disinfect them?
In my very humble opinion, any cleaning of the eggshell surface after it has been cooled down to the farm is of limited value. So any kind of sanitizing that you're going to do, I would recommend doing it at the farm as soon as it comes out of the house. So to do it there is the best time to do it. Outside the U.S., you know, almost everyone would fumigate the eggs at the farm and then deliver them to the hatchery, fumigate them again with formaldehyde and potash, and then maybe even do it a third time before they go into the incubator. That's a pretty common procedure outside the U.S. Inside the U.S., almost no one would fumigate eggs. It's almost unheard of inside the U.S. But if you're going to do it, the earlier you can do it at that farm before that bacteria can get into the shell. We did some trials internally with Cobb. We had a fumigation system at a new hatchery, and it did a really good job. And what we found was that we could clean, once the eggs arrived at the hatchery, we could fumigate them. We could go from growth on the eggshell to no growth on the eggshell. And then we had a control group that we hadn't fumigated, and at 18 days, the contamination level was identical. We hadn't solved any problems by fumigating at the hatchery. That's been my experience, and I know there are a lot of other opinions on that, and a lot of people do fumigate at the hatchery or spray eggs. I have been to hatcheries where they completely soak the eggs, dripping wet. Every portion of the eggshell was dripping wet in the egg room at the hatchery. I don't promote that, but they actually got that was in the Middle East, and they actually got pretty good results from it. They were big believers, but not something that we would promote at Cobb or I would promote, but there are many, many different methods of doing that.
And there's a lot of variables that you have to control. Some of them, some of the things, even cleaning with the wet sanitizers and stuff, if done right with the right temperatures at the right time, it can be beneficial. If it's done at the wrong time, like you said, with cooler water, it can actually make it far worse than your situation.
Yeah, and honestly, over cleaning is a huge problem in the industry and around the world. Where over cleaning eggs and trying to they're taking off the cuticle about over cleaning eggs is a very common problem, and it probably causes more contaminated eggs than no cleaning at all. But not probably, it does. I mean,
yeah.
I would much rather not touch them at all and just set an egg with 3D, fecal material on it than to over clean the egg. That is a much bigger problem worldwide, honestly.
Yeah, and if we try it and don't do it right, like you said, it's much, much worse.
Yes.
Okay, we talked about the fogging system using formaldehyde and different things. Can you explain just briefly again the importance of doing that and the potential effects on hatchability if it's done too much or something?
So we're talking about in the hatcher?
Yeah.
Okay. So in the hatcher, when the chicks begin to pip, the contamination or the bacteria counts in a hatcher are going to start steadily climbing, and about 12 hours after pipping begins, they're going to go too numerous to count. And this is regardless of how clean your egg pack is. You're going to have bacteria in those hatchers when pipping begins. So we need some way to control that bacteria count and to keep it from overwhelming those newly hatched chicks and causing 7-day mortality. Formaldehyde in the hatcher has been proven over the last 50 years to be the most effective way to do this. Formaldehyde is not a corrosive. It's not going to eat up the equipment, and it's relatively inexpensive, and it's very effective. So that's the number one most common way to sanitize that hatcher cabinet while the chicks are hatching. Hydrogen peroxide is the second most common, and it can be very effective, but it is very corrosive and it can eat up the metal within that machine. So can you do it? Yes. Is it very corrosive? Yes. There are a lot of, especially here in the U.S., limitations on usage of formaldehyde. So many people in the U.S. have gone to using formaldehyde in combination with hydrogen peroxide or with a quat. So they begin using formaldehyde and then have to have so many hours of withdrawal when they switch to a quat product or a hydrogen peroxide. So, but if you do not do anything in that hatcher, you will have a huge bloom of bacteria, and it will affect your 7-day mortality, especially on older flock sources.
Okay, thank you much. Couple of questions in different, same topic, different uses, but about using UV lights. Asked about UV lights in the air ducts and the eggs and the machines. A couple different questions along things. What are your thoughts on UV lights for?
I have seen that tried. I've seen people using them. I haven't seen any huge results from them, to be honest. And I applaud the industry and everyone for making an effort and working in that direction. And there may be a product out there that I have not seen that does a really good job, but as of now, I haven't seen a lot of results from it. I've seen, different methods of sanitation used, and honestly, I haven't seen huge results from them.
Yeah, I would agree with what I've seen as well. You did mention this a couple times in there. I think it's worth repeating. What the frequency of cleaning and disinfecting multi-stage incubators. I know that's that there's a wish list of how often it should be done, and we recommend it's done. In reality,
right,
sometimes not. But again, what is your recommendation for that, and why really?
For multi-stage incubators, a minimum of twice a year. The hatchery that I managed, the last hatchery that I managed, we did it 4 times a year. It was a parent hatchery, and we had the labor and the ability to do it, so we did it 4 times a year, but a minimum of twice a year in a broiler hatchery.
Yeah. And it does take some work to be able to really get into the multi-stage, but I think it's
that's regardless of brand. I mean, hey, we're on Jamesway here, and Jamesway is some work. It's some labor, but you really need it at least twice a year.
Yeah. Yeah, we were just discussing that last week, the necessity to do that and how often some people do. What are your thoughts on rotating cleaners and sanitizers in the hatchery?
I think if you have a good product and you're doing a good job of cleaning so that you don't have a lot of 3D material left when you're done cleaning, and your counts are remaining consistent, I don't know that rotation is that necessary. Most of the products that we would use would be very, very similar active ingredients anyway, so you're kind of going from one to the other. As far as using an acid cleaner, I would definitely recommend that. So go from a chlorine-based cleaner to an acid cleaner, 1 week a month is a good thing. Probably should have had that in my presentation actually, but yeah, to rotate that for your tray wash and for your general cleaning is a good thing. To go to an acid-based for a period of time, 1 week a month is a good thing.
Yeah, it's interesting as we're talking about how often to clean the multi-stage, get in there and clean them. One of the comments on there was dream on. And I know in a hatchery that's running really full, yeah, it's tough to do. If your hatchery is really full, it's like, when are you going to empty it out and move it out? But yeah, the important, I've been in hatcheries before and asked how often you get in there and really clean it out in multi-stage. And this was several years ago, and they said, we can't even remember the last time we did it.
Right. No,
and that's not uncommon to see, but like you said, the recommendation is yeah, twice a year to try and make it work. But the reality is they don't do it, but eventually it's going to come back and get them.
Absolutely.
Okay, a question about, you talked about the using the foam disinfecting, sanitizing, but it sticks. So what happens if somebody's in a hurry and they just like spray the disinfectant or sanitizer on that foam and then they just get right back after it and clean it off? I mean, it reduces the effectiveness. Do you have any idea of how much?
No, I really couldn't say, and it's according to how quickly they did it. But honestly, the sanitizer, we just want to apply it and leave it. We don't want to rinse it off at all. We want to apply that sanitizer and walk away. We don't want to be rinsing the sanitizer off at all. So that would be my recommendation, is to apply it and leave it. And, sanitize that hatcher, and then roll the baskets in there and cut it on and let it start getting up to temperature and getting dry. Which brings up another good point. We never ever want to transfer eggs into wet hatcher baskets. We want to make sure those hatcher baskets are dry and up to temperature. And in a Jamesway multi-stage, there's 2 days a week we're going right back into those machines after hatch. We're transferring right back in. And so my procedure, we actually ran that hatch room up to, we had the ability to, and we ran it up to like 100 degrees in the hatch room itself, so that we could get those machines up to temperature and get them dry. It made a big difference, honestly, in getting those hatcher baskets dry. We started out just sticking an electric heater in the hatcher to help it get up to temperature, and we just switched to just cranking the temperature up on that room. Hey, did we burn some gas? Yes, but we got those baskets up to temperature and we got them dry before transfer.
Yeah, we gotta get that for sure. Another question, kind of combination of some things. Somebody asked the best one, if it's important using a warm water as your spray down rinse when you're cleaning out your hatches and stuff, but also, is there an effect of water temperature when you're mixing detergent or disinfectants? Is there an effect
I have not seen any research on that. A higher temperature water might affect the dilution of the chemicals, but I haven't seen anything on that at all. I can't give any recommendation there at all.
Yeah, but I mean, obviously, if you're using warmer water, I mean, it's probably better than cold. But
yeah,
as far as disinfecting, I mean, really, what you're doing is you're sanitizing your cleansers is what's most important there.
Yeah.
So in talking about the Asper in a hatchery, in a region you've got high humidity and higher temperatures, is that you're likely to see a more prevalence of Asper more in high temperature, high humidity areas? Like,
I spent a lot a lot of time in the last couple of years in Central America and Asia, very near the equator. Honestly, didn't see that much asper there. Asper in the U.S. is typically more common in the spring and fall. When you get that bloom of growth in the spring, and then in the fall, everything's kind of closing down and you see more asper. So I don't know that that's necessarily true. There are many, many challenges to running a hatchery in a high humidity, hot weather climate, but I don't know that that's one of them. I don't know that I actually see that much.
Okay. Here's a question directed specifically to your presentation. You'd mentioned 0.075 milliliters per chick formalin fumigation, and is that, they want to know, is that the total volume of formalin throughout the entire hatch process in the hatcher?
Yes, that is from transfer until pull.
Total.
That is total. Yep. So if you're transferring 10,000 eggs into a hatcher and you're hatching 85%, it would have 8,500 chicks. I would take that, if that's my average hatch is 85%, I would take that 8,500 chicks and multiply it times 0.075, and that would be the total formalin from transfer into hatch. I could have put a couple of slides in there on that, but typically I like to administer one dose of formalin immediately after transfer, 2 or 3 hours, let's say, just to kind of kill down any bacteria from transfer, any exploding eggs, just to try to knock it down. And then I would go for a period of 12 to 24 hours where I wouldn't really use any when you're not pipping. Before the chicks start pipping, you don't need a lot of formalin, but once that pipping begins, really every 2 hours from then, as long as you can. And many places you can only go 12 hours before pull. It has to have a 12-hour time period before you can get back into that machine. So I would go as long as I could towards pull.
Okay, so when you're talking about that, how much formalin, is that using the, because you have formaldehyde, then you have formalin, like a 40% formalin. Is that
that's 37% formalin? Yes.
That's based on the 37% formalin.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. And my understanding is, I'm not a scientist by any means, but the 37% is the maximum amount of formalin you can dilute in water to make it a liquid. Is how they come up with that 37.
Okay.
And I see around the world, I see many people who will mix formalin with water. So how many mLs are you putting in there? I'm putting 30 mLs and I'm putting 30 mLs of water. That happens very common. I don't see any advantage in that, but many people do dilute the formalin when they apply it.
Okay. One more where we've got a few here that are kind of specific. We'll answer afterwards. We'll get to you. But you mentioned about for the aspirin cleaning the ducts. Is there any type of equipment that can be used for the HVAC system, long ducts, other than just, or was it just kind of,
many people will vacuum them. I mean, vacuuming them out is very common. Try to vacuum them and wash as much as you can, but vacuuming is very common to actually use a shop vac and try to vacuum out and get as much dust and buildup out of them as possible. Other than that, I don't know of anything. Don't know of any robotics yet for hatcher ducts. Outside the U.S., I see a lot of duct work that is the just basically almost like a trash bag, and it's got holes in it to dilute the air or disperse the air, not dilute it, disperse the air, and that's pretty common. So when they start getting a little dirty, they just take that down, throw it away, and put up another duct.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, there's quite a few here wanting specifics, which we're not going to address right here. Okay, well, thank you very much, Tommy. We might have you send you some of these other remaining questions and answer by email. I think it'd be a little bit easier to answer.
Absolutely. Yep.
Other than this, sometimes it's hard to give exact numbers on here, and they're kind of specific questions. So some of you will get a response back to your questions via email if you have those kind. But again, thank you very much, Tommy, for your excellent presentation. And I know a lot of people benefited from it and learned a lot. And again, if you got on here late, missed part of it, you'll get a link for this tomorrow. You can watch the whole thing again and watch and listen to Tommy do it all again. And also have his contact information, be able to get with him if you have any questions. So again, thank you very much. And we'll look forward to seeing you again on another edition of our webinar Wednesday. So thank you for joining us. Bye.